Hi, welcome back to the Busy Corner. Today I'm going to show you a very cute basic cowl from Lion brand. It is made, the pattern was written for Woolies Thick and Quick. And this example will show you exactly what you're going to do. 3 rows of a rib knit and end with the 3 rows of rib knit, and the body is done in stockinette. This is a little bit short. The original pattern calls for making it 26 inches across, 12 inches deep. I didn't have quite enough yarn for this, but it shows the stitch definition, and it's really cute on, even at this length. So, Woolies yarns are, not created the same, but it doesn't really matter as long as you save enough for the end. And each row takes 9 feet of yarn, and the scarf ends with 3 rows of rib knit, and then of course your cast off rows. So save yourself about 40 feet or so. And then what I do is just tie a little slip knot 40 feet from the very end of the ball. So I know for this scarf that I'm doing in Sequoia, which is a short skein, that I can do 2 more rows. So just be aware of that. Otherwise it doesn't matter for the pattern. Woolies is a very elastic yarn, but it looks just as cute in this Luxe Buttercream yarn, which is an alpaca blend and has a lot more drape to it. So now this I did with my fingers. And some of these others I did with a crochet hook, and they're a little bit tighter. The original pattern called for 52 stitches on a US 15. I used 44. And that got me about 24 inches because they tend to stretch. So, you could do a gauge swatch or just guess, which is how I do it, frankly. And that's what I thought looks the cutest and was pretty consistent. Then, when you begin, you're going to need to cast on. We're just going to do that a couple of those really quick. You want your edge to be elastic, so a thumb cast on works really well for that. And I will refresh your memory by showing it a few stitches. In fact, let's get a little bit bigger too, because it's a little easier to show. So, we'll just put on a few. You will need about 5 feet for your tail before your slip knot. To cast on 44 stitches. So this is your tail on the left here, and you're working on the right, and I just cross and I make my slip like that, and I put it on my tubing, and then I hold them onto my left side, and I have the tail in my left hand, and I just hold it against my palm with a couple of my end fingers there, my last finger and my ring finger, and then I take the tail and I bring it up around my thumb. So now I have a loop when I cross these over, and I put my hoop under that loop. My working yarn now is in my right hand, and I'm going to wrap it counterclockwise, and then I'm going to hold it out here next to the tubing while I bring this loop that's still around my thumb over the top, over the rod, and then I pull on that. If I want this edge stitching to be tighter, I pull on the tail. If I want the piece going around the tubing to be tighter, I pull on the working yarn. So again, the yarn is under my fingers, around my thumb, the tubing goes into the loop, the working yarn goes around counterclockwise, the loop comes over, and I pull it tight. It's under the loop, working yarn around, loop comes over, snug it up. Check as you go along if they're not, if you can't move them on here, they're way too tight. My mistake is usually to make them too loose, but you want them loose enough so you can work them with the crochet hook. Now, if you're working the pattern as I did, you'll want your 16-inch hoop, and you'll put on 44 stitches. This is just a little sample one so I could show you how we're going to do this with a crochet hook. Now, when you begin your knitting, it's going to look like this when you finish casting on. And, well, actually, it's going to look like this when you finish casting on. So, to begin, you're going to want to roll that ridge to the inside of your hoop and turn it so that the tail and the working yarn are on the right hand side, and the first stitch you cast on is here on your left. Then, to begin knitting, you can tension your yarn. I would suggest one of two ways. If I don't need a lot of tension, I bring the yarn, again, this is your working yarn, between my last two fingers, like so, and across the top of my fingers, and I just roll my hand like that. If I want more tension, I just put my hand palm up around my yarn, wrap it around my pinky as I turn my hand, and the yarn is now across, but wrapped around my pinky. Now the first row is a little tricky because it's tighter from where you cast on. If you need to, use a smaller hook for this row, your first row. And to do the ribbing, you're going to do 2 front stitches, then 2 back stitches, 2 front stitches, 2 back stitches, 2 front stitches, 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls. Now, if I were knitting these stitches, I would be using the front leg, like so. So don't be confused if you're a knitter. I tried that with the crochet hook, and I didn't like it for a number of different reasons. For one, we want it to look exactly like it is when we use our fingers. And 2, it's actually easier just to use this back leg. It's easier to see, and it's easier to grab only the working yarn and not other stitches. So to begin, we're going to begin with 2 back stitches, or 2 knit stitches, because that's what happens when you're knitting. You're pulling the yarn through the back. And you don't need to change this pattern, by the way. It's written for knitting in the round, and you do it just as it says. When it says to knit, you do a back stitch, and when it says to purl, P, you do a front stitch. So, to make a back stitch, we have the yarn behind to the back, and we take our crochet hook, and for this first round, again, it has to be a little bit smaller to get in there. Now, if you need to, take your other fingers right here, your thumb and your second finger, to pull the old stitch down, bring the crochet hook in, grab the yarn. You can turn the hook a little bit if you need to bring the yarn through. Don't have so much tension that you can't get it through the hole. Okay? Now, here's the new stitch on my crochet hook. Take the old stitch off with your thumb by just pushing it up. Now, you can see 2 V's. You can see that the old stitch left the bar on the back side. That's your, I'm just going to take that out for a second. If I were using my fingers, like we made the hats and everything else, I would just push the yarn through. And again, that's what you're left with. And remember, I always say the stitches need to march around the tube, so you lay it face down, if you will. And that's exactly what we do when we're going to use the hook. So again, the yarn is behind. I want to make a back stitch, which simply means I need to bring the yarn through this back, the back of the stitch, through this back leg. So my yarn goes through the stitch, gets the yarn, or my crochet hook, and then drop the old stitch and put the new stitch on. Now, to make a front stitch or a purl stitch, you need to bring the yarn to the front. You're still going to use this back leg of the stitch, so you want to take your crochet hook, pull the stitch down so you can see what you're doing, pull the hook through from back to front, and then you can either drop the yarn over the crochet hook like so, like you do if you're knitting continental. Now you pull the stitch up, and it's easier to put it on the next side, the other side, if you drop the old stitch first and put it on the pipe. So now, I forgot to put my stitch marker on. It was here. You can see this knot, okay? But you can see already, here were my 2 back stitches. Here's a front stitch. How do you know that? It's got the bar. The old stitch got dropped to the front. So let's do another front stitch. The crochet hook goes under the back leg, from back to front. The yarn comes over the hook. The yarn comes through. And you want to make sure you drop this old stitch off, and it goes on face down. Oops. So, now I have to do 2 back stitches. And again, this time when you put the stitch on the other side, you're going to drop it more or less like so. It's harder to do when I've got it holding it out here like this so you can see. I don't have it in front of me. So again, now we can go back here. Here's my 2 back stitches. Here's my 2 front stitches. Here's 2 back stitches. I'll do 2 more front stitches. So again, we're still going to use the back leg of the stitch every time, and we're going to go from back to front. The yarn is already in the front, and you could pick your yarn like this. Do that again. So the yarn is again around my index finger. You can push the yarn down like so to get it out of your way. And then if you want to, if you take your index finger, it will press the yarn over the top of the crochet hook, and you can pull it through. And again. So when you lay these front stitches, or what are going to correspond to purl stitches, let's do another one of those. They're a little trickier. If you want to, you can pull the front leg down to that stitch so you can get in there a little easier. And then when you do, it's easier if the yarn is already on top of the crochet hook. And just press the yarn down a little bit, hook it. Now, if I don't drop this stitch, and by the way, if this is hard to do, you might have more tension on your yarn than you need. Maybe your hands are a little sweaty or the yarn is sticky. Just do it like this, and you can more easily release tension if it seems like you can't get the stitch over there. Now, let's say I put the stitch over here, but I go to knit the next stitch and it looks like this. It's because I didn't drop the last stitch. It should always look like this when you're done. That is, the working yarn should be following the new stitches over here. And again, you can see that those were back stitches, these are front stitches. Now, this first row is a little trickier. Once you get along, as you're going, and again, when you're not using your thing, put a rubber band on there. As you're working the body of the piece, it's all one stitch. And I think going through from front to back and doing back stitches, in other words, bringing the yarn through the back, is much easier to do than coming through the front. So I did all mine as back stitches. You wouldn't have to. So you can see that the knit side of the stockinette fabric is tucked inside there. And I think it's easier to tuck the whole piece inside like this. So I'm about to begin a new row, but you'll see now you can use a bigger knitting crochet hook. This is a 10 millimeter. It's an N. And again, if you need to, you're using a bigger hoop. Now you can kind of just balance it on your thigh if you want to. And now you want to reach in from front to back. Again, you're going to be sliding the crochet hook next to the rod, going in. Okay, your yarn is back behind. Just hook the yarn with your crochet hook, and now push that up and off and on to the other side. Notice that when I make this stitch, all I'm doing with my crochet hook is this. So again, in, hook, off, place. Now, if you make the little points, it's actually a little easier to get it onto the next side. Take it off, put it on. But as long as you notice that where the stitch is the largest is next to the hook itself. And just let your hook ride along that rod, and it'll pretty much guide it, even if you've left this flat. And if you have the right tension around your hand, you really don't even need to snug these up each time. It'll happen automatically. You can tip your hand a little bit to make that. Notice how I'm just taking the stitch and placing it like so. Whoops. If you drop it, don't panic. Okay? just take it with your fingers and go, uh-oh, which way does it need to go? Well, it can't go like this. That's twisting the stitch. You see that? It has to look like this. And it has to go, if you will, towards you or face down when you place it on the. If you don't do that. Now, let's say you make a mistake. Let's say you drop a stitch. And let's say you drop it, they come out. It looks like this now. Now you're really panicking, right? Because now your stitching is coming out. Which I'm actually having to pull this. Okay? So now, here's my knitting. And I say, uh-oh. Well, remember, it's just like we did with the rods. And you might want a smaller hook. And all you do, remember that when we knit, we're going in the back and we're dropping the old stitch to the rear. Correct? So now you can see, it's harder to see on this plastic clothes hanger. But if I pull this apart, you can see it almost looks like a run in a stocking. These are the pieces of yarn that make up the stitches. And all I need to do is reach through. For instance, this stitch didn't come out. Well, make sure you can see where the next stitch is. Here's it. And reach through from front to back and grab the first one and bring it through. Okay? Now you fixed one stitch. And now do the same thing again. And if it's pulled out, you might have to use your smaller hook just to fix it. Again, go in from front to back. This is your fixing knit stitches or stitches that you've made from coming in the back or back stitch. Now you're in through the stitch. Take the next ladder of yarn and bring it through. If you drop it, no big deal. It's not going to come out. Now, put it back on your hook. Oh, here's another one. Okay? Now look, it should look exactly like this. And now you fix the stitch. Now, you're saying, well, where was I? Well, here's my working yarn. It's on this stitch. So I know I didn't knit this one yet. If I want to put it back on there, I have to put it, I'm going to the left side, I haven't knit it yet. Put its back on. If you want to think of a stitch as having a front and a back, just like that. And then when you go to knit it, oops, where's my yarn? What's going on here? There it is, head to tail. And when you go to knit it, then whether you take your fingers or whether you take the hook, and go through there. Okay? And if you were doing purl stitches or front stitches, you do the opposite. And that's how you fix a mistake you've made. Now, when you go to stop, be sure you see how they want to stretch out a little bit? No problem. This, this is your coat hanger thing. You made it for free. You got it out of your closet. This is our pandemic video. Okay, and then when you go to end it, don't forget, you have to join up at the very end there after you've gone back to your rib knit, and you want to go from front to back through the last stitch you cast off. You can look at my earlier videos and I show how to do that. And then just weave in your ends, you're done, you got a cute scarf. Thanks for watching.